Hi everyone, it is really good to see you. Thank you so much for joining Living Brother for this week. I am so sorry that I have not uploaded any videos for the last several weeks because I was going through a hectic schedule in my school ministry, so that I was not able to produce any videos. Today, I intended to bring a lesson about how we can cope with high level of fear and anxiety in a particular situation. I want to read Psalm 62, the early part of Psalm 62, from verses 1 to 6. And we know that this psalm was composed by David. Let me read it through. Truly my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I shall never be shaken. How long will you assault me? Would all of you throw me down? This leaning wall and this tottering fence? Surely they intended to topple me from my lofty place. They take delight in lies. With their mouth they bless, but in their hearts they curse. Yes, my soul finds rest in God. My hope comes from him. Truly he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress. I shall not be shaken. Many scholars believe that David composed this psalm when he fled from Absalom, who rebelled against his father David. And we can find its evidence in verse 4. David said his enemies intended to topple him from his lofty place. In other words, he is saying that his enemies are trying to cast him down from his throne. In that difficult situation, David described himself as a leaning wall and tottering fence, which means he was being shaken in that situation. He became powerless and he was in utter despair. He was full of fear and anxiety. It seems that his life was in the hands of his enemies. However, David did not allow the situation to control his emotions. Instead, he tries to increase the level of his trust in God. And as a result, he could say that he shall never be shaken. How could it be possible for David to have a strong assurance that God was going to deliver him in that difficult situation? I want to tell you two particular methods that David used in that situation. The first one is that he commanded his soul to find rest in God and God alone. In this English version, if you look at verse 1 and 5, they look like declarative sentences, but actually they are imperative sentences, which means David is commanding his soul not to panic, not to be fearful, not to be anxious, not to be in utter despair, but to find rest in God and God alone. As he patiently and quietly waited upon God, he was assured that God was the only hope in his life and God was going to bring him salvation in that situation. Sometimes when we are despaired or full of anxiety and fear, it is important to speak to our soul, to command our soul to be quiet in God's presence and find rest in God alone. The second method that David used is that he reminded himself that God was his rock, his salvation, and his fortress. By remembering God's endless deliverance and rescue and salvation from many different kinds of dangerous situations in the past in his life. In that very difficult moment when he was fleeing from his son Absalom, he sat down somewhere. He began to remember what God has done so far in his life. God rescued him from the hands of Goliath. God rescued him from lions and bears. God rescued him from many different kinds of situations when he felt that there was no hope. As believers, it is really important for us to remember God's grace. Remember God's grace and remember His grace, His wonderful works that He demonstrated in our lives. As long as we are sure that God is faithful in our lives, whatever situation we are in, we do not lose our hope, because the faithful God who has been with me all the time is still with us, and He will lead us and guide us continually in our lives. I intentionally colored verses 1 and 2 and verses 5 and 6 with a blue color because the verses 1 and 2 and 5 and 6 are almost identical. And I do believe that David intended to sandwich his fear, anxiety, and despair with the strong sense of security and trust in God. So verse 1 and 2 and 5 and 6 are like two ends of the burger buns, and verse 3 and 4 are the feelings. The feelings are fear, anxiety, and despair. And now David is squeezing his fear, anxiety, and despair with the hope and trust that he has in God. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. It is important for us to squeeze our fear, anxiety, and despair in a situation with the strong sense of trust and assurance that God is with us and He will help us. He will rescue us from the situation. And that was a secret that David was able to overcome that difficult situation. As we begin a new week, and we may face different kind of challenges and different matters, and also we expect that we are going through a hectic schedule again this week. But don't forget, you have to command your soul to find rest in God and God alone. As long as we kneel down before the Lord and find rest in God alone, we will feel that we are not shaken by anything. But our hearts and minds will be guarded by the peace of God from above. And you and I will feel that we are strengthened by the truth of God and by the Spirit of God. Have a wonderful week in Christ. Bless you.